The following is a presentation of Surprise Church. El siguiente programa es la presentación de la iglesia Surprise.
About 10 years ago, even then pagers were like, who uses pagers anymore? But that was the best way they could call you in the middle of the night without waking up your whole family. And I hated bringing this thing home because those of you, and we have a lot of medical staff here at Surprise, we have a lot of people who are nurses, doctors, flight nurses, paramedics, and they get used to it, they tell me, after a while, but I was new at this, and so I wasn't yet. And you go to sleep with just this trepidation, this heartbeat that doesn't quite slow down, because you know that thing, if it rings, you know what it means. If it vibrates, you know what it's saying. And for me, there's no other reason they'd let me get a page unless someone died. And the hospital provided a service for people who lose loved ones by providing a chaplain to be there with them during that understandably painful moment. 2 a.m, my pager went off. And I wasn't completely asleep because I never could quite get to sleep, but I was underneath enough to be startled to wakefulness. Grabbed the pager, looked at the number. It was the right number. Got dressed, jumped in the car. Traffic, normally in the Twin Cities, isn't great, but at 2 a.m, it's amazing. It's amazing. Just cruised right to the hospital, not a car in sight, pulled into the parking lot, and, parking at 2 a.m. is fantastic in the Twin Cities. I had the choice of the spots, but it didn't make me happy. I knew why I was there. So I went to the ER, and they had a room where a man had been brought after having a heart attack, 53 years old, his wife also in her low 50s. And they simply closed the doors and let them have their time. He had died about 45 minutes earlier. And they teach you maybe what you can say in school and pastor school, but there's nothing quite ideal that you can say at that moment that's going to fix anything. There's nothing you can say that will take this pain away. Knowing that going to a room is pretty humbling. Don't have any power over the situation whatsoever. Try to speak a simple word if you can. I walked in, and what I saw just made me kind of just stop and freeze in my tracks, because what I saw was a woman who was just empty. Totally in disbelief that you could go from the lake cabin, water skiing during the day, to this that night. She sat beside her now late husband with her hand on his cheek. And just over and over again, stroking a cheek that had once been warm and full of color and full of life and probably a little sassy and forgetful and grumpy, and the man she had looked into the eyes of for years and said, "I love you." And just the look in her face was, this can't be real. Spent about an hour with her. And on my way home, I was a little bit bitter, because here I am so sure of the gospel that I've gone to school and decided to be a pastor and all those fancy-dancy things, and yet I can sit in a room like that and feel pretty powerless. And I just kept seeing her face and her hand on his face. I got home 3:15 in the morning. Of course, my wife is still well asleep, and I got to our bedroom, and there's enough light where I could see her face, and I just remember sitting down in the bed and putting my hand against her cheek. It just didn't seem fair. And it made me want to soak up every minute. I don't know how long I slept that night, but I slept with my hand right there. See, the resurrection message is meant to change how we look at life, and it's meant to change how we look at death. But we get in those moments where something ends. And those are the real tests. We get in those moments where something doesn't work right. We get in those moments where the doctor says something that we were not prepared to hear. And then the battle begins. Do I really believe this? Is this really real? Is this really for me? Is this really for my loved one? I think the Apostle Peter, after Jesus died, had that feeling in spades. You see, he's sitting on a boat again. You're not going to believe how this is the last place Peter expected to be a week ago. This is the last place Peter expected to be because he had left his boat. He had left his boat to follow Jesus and didn't plan to go back except to ride across the lake with Jesus, and he's back on the boat. Well, let me explain. So Luke chapter 5, the beginning of the story. Luke chapter 5, he is sitting in the boat for the first time. April, can you click the next slide for me? For whatever reason, it's not coming on my fancy schmancy remote yet. He's sitting in his fishing boat. He's a fisherman. Fishermen were on the bottom rung of society, right down there, literally, with prostitutes and tax collectors. Nothing against you fishermen here. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they were seen as people who are kind of on the edge of society. The water was seen as kind of an evil abyss, and these guys are on the water, and I don't know, I can't exactly explain it, but they were seen very low, and yet that's who Jesus calls to him, which is so cool. But so Jesus is down by the water. This is early in Jesus' life. He didn't have a crowd of disciples yet, but he was teaching enough so that people loved to hear what he had to say, and they came to listen to him. And so he's standing on the shore. One day, as Jesus was standing by the Sea of Galilee, the people were crowding around him, listening to the word of God. Identified already that what Jesus said was like God's words. It's coming out of his mouth. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by fishermen who were washing their nets. So Jesus is on the shore. People are crowding around him so much that he's kind of like, like a movie star and the paparazzi snapping photos, trying to get closer and closer, and it's hard for anybody to see and to hear. And so he looks around and he sees these boats there that fishermen who are mending their nets over there, maybe over listening, from afar. They'd been fishing all night, caught nothing, and they're just putting the nets away. Just cap it, throw in the towel, cap it off, and just go home. Well, he doesn't even ask. I love this. Jesus rarely asks permission. You'll find that if you haven't followed him yet, he's not a guy that tends to just wait for you. He tends to just do stuff in your life, even when you don't know it's possible. He tends to put things in motion before you maybe even want them in motion because you can't necessarily see where they're going. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats there by fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats. Now, maybe right there that would be enough to get you slugged. I don't know. He just jumps in their boat, and is the one belonging to Simon. Simon is Peter's prior name before Jesus, without asking his permission, changed it. And he asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat and taught the people from the boat. Have you ever been to a lake cabin or on a boat and heard someone talk from a long ways away and you're just amazed what you can hear? Has that ever happened to you? So I think this is part of having a natural amphitheater where his words can be heard by more people as they just bounce off the water, and half crowd control so that he doesn't get pressed against the shore by a crowd of people who's trying to come and hear him. So now he teaches sitting in Peter's boat while Peter just sits next to him, listening to the words of God. When he had finished speaking, Jesus said to Simon, "Put out a little deeper. Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Now, this is an insult because Peter's a fisherman, he's a pro, Jesus is a carpenter. I don't know if you have a business where people like to come into your business and kind of act like they know better, Like I always like those drug commercials. Talk to your doctor about whatever the drug we're talking about. Tell him that this is what you need. I'm like, how am I supposed to tell my doctor what I need? He's my doctor. Sorry, we have a drug rep here. You know what I mean. And I tell you what, it's like you can run a business and someone comes in and they say, "Hey, I think that you should put your pictures over there, decorate this way. Actually, could you do this that way?" You're like, I'm the pro here. Peter, I think, could have a I'm a pro moment, but he had been listening to Jesus for however long he'd been talking. And this guy's like, all right, I'm going to listen to this guy. Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." So he goes out into deep water. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So the nets they were washing because they'd given up are now breaking because Jesus showed up. In our lives, the things that we are just ready to give up on because we give up, Jesus shows up and things are totally different than we could have ever imagined or expected. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat, people who ultimately became Jesus' disciples too, to come and help them. They came and they filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Now, were they in shallow water or were they in deep water? Deep water. Jesus he's just not a nice guy sometimes, you know? So their boats are sinking in deep water because Jesus miraculously provided fish they couldn't catch all night long. And you'd think Peter and the rest of them would be freaking out. And you're right, but he's not freaking out about sinking in deep water. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." If you know how to catch fish better than me, then you know what I've done. If you're who I think you are, you know everything about me, not just the parts that I'm willing to show in church. If you can do what I just saw you do, then I am not comfortable with the level of knowledge you have about my past, about my private life, about my sins, about my guilt, about my upbringing, about what I've done to people or had done to me. Then Jesus said to Simon, something that is the most frequent command in the Bible is not love someone. It is don't be afraid. 365 don't be afraids in the Bible. Coincidence? I think not. One for every day of the year. Don't be afraid. From now on, you're going to be a fisherman. But from now on, you will fish for people. What just happened in the water is going to happen on the shore. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. Now, this for a fisherman would have been a really, really nice income stream. You've got two boats so full they're sinking. But they leave it all on the shore. They leave all that money on the table because they found something better. They discovered a relationship that they don't want to let go of, that the money couldn't replace, that the economic opportunity just is eclipsed by. They leave everything and follow him. And for 3 years, they have the most amazing, life-giving experience. Peter looks back at that, and I imagine there's a tear on his face now, looking back, because he's back in the boat. And it's not a good kind of back in the boat. It's a tragic kind of back in the boat. It's I'm dating again after I never thought I'd be looking for someone, after I was married once and now it didn't work out. It's I'm back in school because the career I thought I would have didn't work out. I'm back in the hospital because the doctor's prognosis of health didn't pan out. I am still writing letters trying to get my adult kid to talk to me again because the counseling session we had, the intervention we had didn't work out. Peter's back in the boat because his efforts didn't pan out. The dream he had, the experience they had didn't last. And he's sitting there fishing for fish. God, I was supposed to be fishing for people. I was supposed to be changing lives. I was supposed to be out there with him, and I'm fishing for fish. What bittersweet memories. I mean, to look back in that first moment where they met and Jesus is like, throw the nets down in the deep, and he can't even get the net back in the boat. To have that moment later, after he followed him, where they jump back in another boat on the Sea of Galilee, same sea, same lake, and a storm came, which is likely to happen on the Sea of Galilee. Storms would come by surprise over the hill and just come, and they just catch you by surprise. You couldn't even see them coming. So they get caught in storms a lot on the water. And in one particular point, Jesus is on the back of the boat sleeping. And the disciples are literally worried about drowning. So they wake him up, Master, don't you care that we're going to die? Oftentimes it does feel that way, that when we're experiencing the storms of life, God seems to be sleeping. Jesus wakes up, rolls his eyes, scolds the storm, it stops, and looks back at them and says, Olegu pistoi in the Greek, the language which this text was written. You of little faith, why did you doubt? Exactly, Peter thinks. Why did I doubt? He remembers another time on the shore where after Jesus fed the 5,000 families on the mountain, he said, I'm going to be alone and pray. You go back across the lake. I'll meet you on the other side. I'll hitch a ride with somebody else. So they go on the water without Jesus, and another storm comes up, and again they think they're going to drown, and then they look and they see what they think is a ghost on the water, and they freak out. And he says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's me. Peter stands up, unlike the rest of the disciples. He's kind of one of those guys that says what's on his mind, for better or for worse, and if you're that guy, you know what I mean. But in this moment, it gave him an incredible opportunity. He said, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out on the water with you. They all look at him like, are you crazy? Do you look at that water? Come, Jesus said. Peter, sitting here in the boat, remembers the feeling of one leg going over the side, what you really wouldn't do in a storm. He remembers the feeling of that one leg coming down and on firm water. Not ice fishing firm water, water. And then he remembers putting more weight down on that foot, lifting the other leg out of the boat and standing with both feet on water as he's walking towards Jesus. And he takes another step, and he takes another step, he takes another step, and he's looking at Jesus, but then something out of the corner of his eye catches him. It's called a tidal wave. And he turns, he takes his eyes off Jesus, looks at the wave, and it says as soon as he took his eyes off Jesus, he starts to sink. And he cries out, Lord, save me. And he goes like this, and Jesus catches his hand, lifts him up. And instead of stopping the storm, do you know what he does? Takes him by the hand, and he walks him one step at a time through it. And it's not until they get in the boat again when Jesus says, okay, now stop storm. As if to tell Peter and the disciples and you and I that I might let the storms in your life come for a reason, and I might let them stay for a reason. And that reason might be because I want to show you what it feels like to walk through them with me. Peter had the chance to step out of the boat. He lost his chance for a moment because he took his eyes off Jesus. And then even better, when we fail, as we do, he had the chance to be saved by Jesus on the water. And he had the only experience any human being has ever had of actually walking with Jesus through a literal storm. But you and I have the opportunity to walk with him through the other kind of storms. As Peter sits thinking about these bittersweet memories, he remembers one memory that isn't sweet at all, only bitter. It's probably the last time he ever saw Jesus. He bragged about how he would stand up for Jesus if Jesus was ever attacked or arrested. Jesus just laughed. Peter, tonight, before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. Before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter's like, I would rather die than that. Okay. Jesus is arrested. He's taken to the city and brought before the most prominent, powerful people in the land. And he's standing in front of the most powerful people in the land as they're questioning him, trying to find a way of killing him. Peter, within eyesight of Jesus, is outside in the courtyard, standing by the fire, warming himself with a bunch of servants. Jesus tells the truth in front of the most powerful people in the land, even though that truth is going to kill him. Peter is afraid to tell the truth about Jesus to the servants around him because he's afraid of being associated with this man on trial. Hey, you're with that Galilean, aren't you? I don't know the man. Hey, I've seen you with him. I don't know the man. You were with him. And he curses and screams, I tell you the truth, I do not know him. 3 times. Oh. Sitting here in the boat in John chapter 21, he thinks back, and I bet he wishes he could take back every word and just die with Jesus, because he's dying now. He had this experience with Jesus, and it led to him denying Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. That was the end of his story. Of course, he probably wasn't there, we don't think, when Jesus was condemned to die and was executed. Peter's only role, even though he promised to fight and die with Jesus, was to deny him and to step back and just watch it all unfold. He probably was hiding at the time, afraid to be known and recognized as Jesus' follower. With that beautiful, bittersweet 3-year journey with Jesus, ending with this tragic triple denial of Jesus, Peter is back fishing for fish instead of fishing for people. Imagine, if you can, the cynicism that kicked in, the feeling of, what was the point? God, why did you want me to be married in the first place? Why did you get me that job in the first place? Why did you get me this family in the first place? Why did I have this relationship in the first place? Why did I have this opportunity in the first place if it was going to end like this? I'm back in the boat. I'm right where I was before. I'm fishing for fish. Life is full of those back in the boat moments. Peter doesn't know it, but he is right where Jesus wants him. When you have your back in the boat moment, you are right where he wants you. John 21, watch what happens. Early in the morning, Jesus, this is the guy who died now. Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. I'm not thinking that he put like a nerd glasses on and a mustache, and I don't think he was in disguise at all. I just don't think when they looked at him, they could comprehend a dead guy. And this was the third time they've seen him, by the way. He appeared to them briefly twice before this. I just don't think it was real for them yet. You can have religious experiences, but it doesn't quite get real unless you're in a relationship. Jesus stood on the shore. They didn't recognize him. Verse 5, he called out to them, "Friends, haven't you caught any fish?" Again, not something you want to say to a fisherman who's been fishing all night long and doesn't want to be fishing in the first place. "No," they answered. And I think probably like that. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat. You know, you're just on the wrong side of the boat." Imagine those guys are like, "Man, why don't you come here and say that?" And you'll be able to find some. When they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. Does this sound familiar? This is what we call a second chance. This is what we call going back to the start and re-experiencing a God of grace. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's, we think, John, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, and jumped into the water. Now you're in a boat. Why would you jump into the water to get to the shore? We know how far they are from the shore, even look. The other disciple followed him in the boat, towing the net full of fish. Later we find out there was 153 fish in the net, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. So Peter's thinking in his head, well, I got all these fish, 153, they're towing it. My odds are better at getting there if I just jump in myself. And so he jumps in the water, and we know how fast he went because I believe that he was so excited to see Jesus, he swam as fast as humanly possible. And we know how fast it is humanly possible to swim 100 meters because Michael Phelps did it in 2012, right? Check it out. Keep a close eye on the clock. I wish I had this accent. Man, I wish I had this accent.
Remarkable, stunning.
51. That was Peter's time, 51:21. Right there. Okay? There's no one that, Peter, having denied Jesus 3 times with the experience he had, there is nobody, Michael Phelps included, that's going to beat Peter to Jesus, okay? 51:19. Let's go with 51:19. That's how, with the drag of his cloak. holding him back. I think he got there as fast as humanly possible. And there's a very important reason that I know he at least swam as fast as, if not faster than, Michael Phelps, and that is because of my Neil Diamond record collection. Yeah. Now, I'm usually one of the few people in the room who has a strong affinity, a total man crush on Neil Diamond, but I want to make sure that if there are any others out there, Brett, come on, anybody else with me and Brett, come on. There are more here than less here than the last service. I'm a little disappointed. The early birds must be the smart ones, I'm thinking. Sweet Caroline, thank you. Neil Diamond records are better than just about any gift to get me for Christmas, if you're wondering. Because here's why. The Pandora thing is great. The Spotify thing is great. The MP3 player, iPad, iPhone, whatever you play, it's great. But after a while, and this is why vinyl is coming back, because after a while, if you just listen to music like it's just elevator music in the background and your computer just cranks out one song after another, you start to miss the connection to the sound. You start to have this distance between you and the actual music is a physical thing. There's vocal cords and instruments vibrating, and there's sound waves. And when you just kind of hear a music file, a digital file, you don't necessarily have the physicality and the physical experience of the music. So now there's record shops popping up all over. There's people listening to records all the time because they miss the physical experience of it. Where you can open up the record and take the jacket and just smell it. And you can see the list of the songs and read about the album and take that record out and feel the grooves cut into the record as the sound was etched into it. And you can play it. And of course, what's the first sound you hear when you put the needle down on the record? The crackle, like a fireplace of warmth, right? And then the song. And records usually are not played in the background, because you have to change them every 15, 20 minutes. You have to flip sides. They tend to be more of a centerpiece, more of a focus. You don't get together to have records like Pandora playing in the background. You get together to listen to records. And then you flip them and listen to the other side, and you get the other jacket out and you play the other record. In my opinion, there's no comparison. All convenience of digital files aside, there's no comparison to a Neil Diamond record with the digital Neil Diamond record. But if there was a knock on that door right now, and this guy walks in, guess what I'm doing with my record? I'm going to put my record down. I mean, look at this guy. Look at the hairy chest, first of all. He's bedazzled. Look at that shirt. Look at the eyebrows, the hair, the sideburns, and then, of course, the voice. Oh, my goodness, the voice. If he walks in here and starts singing Sweet Caroline, I'm pretty sure that none of us are going to say, actually, we have the Spotify, we have the file on our computer, we're good. We don't, Neil, you just get a cup of coffee and just sit down. We'll just go ahead and play you on our speakers. We're good. We're going to throw on our cloaks and we're going to swim to this guy. Peter has these vivid memories of seeing his hero on the water, right? This for Peter is the difference between a record and reality. He looks out there. Isn't that sacrilegious? Is that sacrilegious? I'm not quite sure. But I think you get what I'm saying, right? Well, so I think what it actually was like when Peter was swimming, we found some footage of an actual reenactment of Peter swimming to the shore. And here's probably what it was more like this. Huh? Bet you never thought you'd see this, did you? There you go. So that's what it was like. Okay, exactly what it was like. He is swimming to the shore at record pace because he sees the actual artist. And even as cool as it was to be sitting there with the record of Jesus in his hands, this 3-year vivid memory of an encounter and an experience with God in Jesus, there's nothing compared to a long-term living dynamic relationship with him. Sitting in the boat, he drops the record, puts on his cloak, and jumps in the water, beats the boat to the shore because he wants the real thing. He wants the relationship back. So he goes to the shore and he discovers that Jesus is actually, he's built a fire. We think probably to prove that he's not a ghost. He's physical. His body, just like our bodies are going to raise from the dead, and the bodies of our loved ones who believed in him are going to raise from the dead, there's not going to be something left in her casket. He's got scars, and he has made a fire, and he says, get some of the fish that I just helped you cut. We're going to have breakfast. So they cook the fish, and he eats with them. Here's why. Peter started out before the first time he met Jesus in a boat with an idea of God. You could say an MP3 file of music, an intangible, non-physical version of who God is. We oftentimes walk around, and many people in our culture, in our relationship circles, walk around with an idea of God, with an idea of his mercy, and with an idea of what it means to be a part of the church. That leads to an experience. Some of those people have an opportunity to actually experience God, to actually experience his mercy, and to maybe actually experience a church for better or for worse. A lot of people here maybe grew up in the church or went to Catholic school or visited church once, or Christmas and Easter people, whatever. They've got the record, but don't have the relationship. Jesus comes back to Peter because he wants the check marks in that last column. He wants him to be in relationship with God, to have constant access to his mercy, and to be a part of a movement that he died to create to change the world. That is the church. That leads to our next teaching series. Next week, we're starting a series called Church Has Left the Building. If you've got your smartphones, you could do me a favor. You could go to our Facebook page, and this is on the top of our Facebook page. I would love it if you would click share and say, who's going with me? Because I believe there are a lot of people in boats in your life who have an idea of God, mercy, and church, who have no idea of what it feels like to experience God, mercy, and church, and to be in a long-term, living, breathing relationship with God, experiencing his mercy, and a part of his church. We're going to go through the book of Acts, and we're just going to spend a long time walking through the story of what happened after Jesus and Peter had breakfast on the beach. And we're going to uncover the day-to-day rhythms of the organization that began to come to life in Jerusalem, and that it exploded throughout the whole world. And we're going to retrace and reclaim those rhythms and live into them ourselves so that we can experience the power and passion of what they experienced in that first early chapter of the church. Church is going to leave the building. We say that every time we get out of church. We say we're going to pack our stuff into a trailer, and the church is going to leave the building, and we're going to go be church this week. So I want to encourage you to come back if you're a guest, to kind of let those check marks start to fill up that last column in your life, and to think of people in your life who maybe have an idea or maybe have an experience but don't have a relationship, which they get to participate in God's plan to save the world. To have breakfast on beaches with people stuck in boats. In Vancouver, Washington, recently, there was a woman who pulled up to a Dunn Brothers drive-thru, 38 years old. She had a look on her face that I think looked a lot like that woman that I first saw in the ER while she stroked her dead husband's cheek. She nervously, clumsily, through sobbing and through tears, ordered a cup of coffee. She was disoriented and disillusioned. She wasn't sure why she was there. She simply knew that she needed to do something familiar, because after your husband dies in his late 30s, leaving you with your kids alone, you're not sure what to do next. So coffee was the only thing she could get her mind around. The barista at the window, a young man, could tell something was wrong, and somehow asked and got an answer about what happened. Of course, it was followed by a free cup of coffee. You can't really charge someone for coffee after they tell you that, but something else happened. He turned around and he motioned to some other Christians who were working there. They came to the window. He told them what happened. And one by one, their arms exploded out that window and grabbed her hand and said, "Can we pray for you?" She said, "I'd like that." The person behind them actually snapped the photo that went viral. And suddenly a drive-through window became church. You see, church faith comes to life when church leaves the building. The church needs a box like a fish needs a bike. And when you allow yourself to say, this is not just meant to be an experience on Sunday, this is meant to be a life Monday through Monday, then drive-through windows become prayer places. Restaurants and neighborhoods, schools and workplaces, hospitals and dens become places to worship God and share Him. So I'm inviting you today to not just hear a nice Easter sermon. I'm inviting you today to go back to the start with us, to start fresh like Peter had the opportunity to do on that beach. Whatever has happened to you, or whether as the band comes back up, whether you've been burned or bored or burdened by the church in the past, if you've been hurt by someone or found yourself in a plateau of life where you're looking for meaning and purpose, this is it. You found it. Now the question is, are you going to move with Jesus to the fireside on the beach where He puts the check marks where they belong in the relationship column, where you can experience God but have a relationship with Him that goes all week long, where you can experience His mercy but have a relationship where He wakes up in the morning, Scripture says, and extends mercy every single day as a decision to claim you as His kid, and where you don't just go to church but you be the church, so that we can together at Surprise be the surprise of God to a world in need. We're starting to change this city, but we're just scratching the surface, and we'd love you to be a part of it. Would you stand with me and just accept that invitation? Let's close in prayer as we sing our closing song. We're going to celebrate as we close today. God, thank you for the opportunity for second chances. Whether we've been burdened or frustrated by the things in the past, whether we're carrying guilt or shame or just boredom. Convict us today that our future is brighter than we think because our Savior is not dead. And the people in our lives and the issues in our lives look different through the prism of the resurrection. God, help us to celebrate with such joy that we can't stop the vibration of praise as we leave, so that we can be a part of the movement so that the church can leave the building. God, thank you for the resurrection. Let's sing about it and let's celebrate.